Do you want to learn how to balance your stress, stay healthy, and live longer
by using a smartwatch? Then I've got just the guy for you. He's a doctor in Norway, yeah, and the author of The Pulse Cure. He's Dr. Torkil Færø, Mr. HRV, heart rate variability. The topic of today, strap on your smartwatch and watch that stress and disease melt away.
Oh yeah.
With Dr. Torkil Færø. Today we're going to talk about heart rate variability, but first let's go back 12 years ago before you had discovered all this science and you were living in different ways, and surely your heart rate variability was different back then than it is now. And then your dad died, and it changed everything. That's what death does. My mom died a couple of years ago, and that, I believe, gave birth to this podcast, I think. But yeah, can you maybe paint a picture of how your life was like back then, and then how it changed?
Yeah, my life was very good. For many years before that, I had been focused on sailing around the world with my family. So, you need a lot of preparation. You need to learn how to sail. You need to finance money, to work hard. And I was 1 year into a round the world sailing trip. We were going to sail for 4 years. But after 1 year, I suddenly got a text message. We were in Panama by the canal, just ready to go through the canal. And that my dad had become ill, that he had a cancer, that it was, not something he would survive. And then suddenly we just had to pack down everything on the boat, just leave it by the marina, by the canal. 48 hours later, we were at home. And so my dream and my family dream was like shattered. And in addition to that, of course, even worse, my dad was dying. So only 3 months later, he was dead. And he had just been on the boat, just a month before this message, So that changed everything, obviously. We were back home. And more importantly, regarding this, is that I started looking at myself because I understood that, okay, my father died at 73. I wanted to live way longer than that. And I could see that my lifestyle would not take me there. I had become 40 pounds overweight. I did not exercise. I did not care what I was eating. I had been working hard, lots of night shifts, lots of sleep disturbances, lots of stress. I was drinking a couple of glasses of wine every day, as was recommended even at the time. And so I was basically doing everything wrong because then I started to read again. I hadn't opened a book on medicine since medical school. You read so much that you're so tired of it that you think, oh, finally finished, now I can start working. And when I started researching how can I live longer, I saw that, okay, there's so much new information. And I just started changing my life around. Started exercising, to losing weight, cutting alcohol, cutting nicotine, and caring what I was eating, sleeping, all the advice that we now know is so important. And I was doing it, of course, for my own sake, that I wanted to live longer and stay healthier so that I could keep living an adventurous life, I still travel, still sail the world and discover things. So that was my background. I was never sick, but I knew that if I would continue to live this way, I could see from my patients that this is not going to end well. You're going to end up at the same place as my dad. That didn't live. He didn't do anything particularly wrong. He just did what everybody else did. Eat what everybody else eats, so we have to do more than what's the average lifestyle. So that was some of that explanation. So something good came out of it, and that, as you say, that your podcast came out of your mother's death, and my books, came out of this. If my dad hadn't died, I would just have continued in the same way, I'm sure, until now.
Yeah. And it got you reading again too. You loved reading as a kid, and then you got tired of it, I guess. I did too. didn't read throughout my 20s. And yeah, I guess that also changed when my mom died. I didn't realize that. And one of those books that you read was The Body Keeps a Score. And through that, you fell upon this idea of heart rate variability. I don't know if that's the first time you found this concept, this phenomenon, but a lot of times we read a book and we don't do anything about it, but it sounds like reading that book and learning about HRV, it really set off a long chain reaction of actions in you. And why is that?
Yeah, that was really some chain reactions. And as you say, I was on my sailing trip then. 5 years later, we had started sailing again with the family. We were in French Polynesia, had finally passed the canal. And I was lying in the hammock reading The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk, where he was describing a metric called heart rate variability that I had never heard of before, that he as a psychiatrist used to find out, the mental state of the patient, the physiological state. And I got intrigued by that. And by a chance meeting just a couple of months later, I became aware that there were wearables that could track heart rate variability. For the first couple of years, I used an ECG-based monitor that I had to put on and off my chest, sometimes or every day. And a couple of years after that, I became aware that we actually have this metric in the Garmin watches and other watches as well. But the system that Garmin has in their watches is very similar to the ECG-based that I used. And so I could see that this is clearly valuable information and good enough, even from the watches that can cost as little as, $150. So I became aware of this and used these watches. And my publisher became aware that I was doing this and asked if this was a book for them. I had started this just again for my own health, because I then knew that tracking your autonomic nervous system through heart rate variability is maybe the most important metric for your health, for your preventative health, so that you can see whether you are doing the right things. If you are doing the right things, it will show up in your heart rate. And that's the wonder of it. It's almost touching, that for a doctor, that we are used to so many complicated and hard to understand lab tests and mechanisms, and then our heart rate, the simplest of vital signs, can tell us so much. And as we can use these wearables now that almost everybody have, then it becomes actionable for me and so many people. And the book that I wrote then, The Pulse Cure, has been just a tremendous success in Norway. It has sold 30,000 books, which in Norway is like a huge amount. One of the most sold books last year. It was awarded the Reader's Choice books, across genres. And that shows that when people are able to track their physiology in this way, then they can feel it, they get better, and they recommend it to everybody else. Because this book is really sold by like a word of mouth way, that one person reads it, finds out this works, and then recommends it to like everybody they know.
What is the scope of what HRV is measuring or telling us about our nervous system? It's a metric that you've chosen, perhaps because that's the best technology we have right now. Maybe you can imagine some other kind of technology that directly measures vagus nerve or brainstem activity or something, some sci-fi stuff. But yeah, how does it differ from just straight heart rate data or other metrics?
Yeah, so I usually say that watching the heart rate variability is like watching the heart rate with a magnifying glass. You can tell so much more about it, and particularly about the state of our nervous system. And the way it can do that is that, okay, we have a autonomic nervous system in our bodies that is ancient, that we share with all vertebrates like reptiles and mammals and mice and all this. So this is a very basic system in our brains. And it's pretty much overlooked. We have placed too much focus on the thinking prefrontal cortex of our brains. We have paid some attention, to the limbic system that you had Loretta Browning on your podcast, with the limbic system. But even below that, we have the brainstem and the autonomic nervous system. And this is a system that will be activated for fight, flight, and freeze, but also for hunting and for play, for activating. That is the sympathetic part of this autonomic nervous system. So we have the sympathetic part that activates us, that stresses us, that puts us ready for action. And we're supposed to be parts of the day in this mode, from evolutionary times. And then we have the parasympathetic system, the restorative recovery system that we have to be in most of the time so that the body can recuperate after it has been struggling with something. And in this restorative state, our heart rate is low, but our heart rate variability, the variation between heartbeats, is high. And that is because in this restorative state, when we breathe in, the heart rate goes up a little bit. And when we breathe out, the heart rate goes down a little bit. It's like our heart saves a little bit of their powers when there is less oxygen in the lungs. And this variation between heartbeats is an indirect sign that we are in the recovery state. And then, of course, if we are in the stressful state, then the heartbeat beats more like a clock, very steady. Because it's like, even if the lungs have less oxygen, we still need to push through because this organism may not survive the next moment. So this is what this ancient biology, is how it works. So then the wearables can pick up whether we are in the deep relaxed state or in the very stressed state. And of course, it's a sliding scale. So it can tell us how stressed are you in the moment, and throughout the day, the 24 hours, how much stress are you experiencing and how much are you relaxing. And you need to have a good balance here for a sustainable physiology, because around 80% of the diseases that I treat as a doctor, I'm a general practitioner and an emergency physician, they are based on stress. So what makes us sick these days is not microbes from the outside or damages to our systems, from hunting, you would be hurt, you didn't have any shoes for protection and so on. So in the earlier days, the threats came from the outside, from other animals, from enemies, from hunting. But now the threats comes from the inside, from a stress system that is out of control, that is way more stress on our systems that we are constructed to deal with as humans. And that makes us sick. That makes us prone to chronic inflammation and the diseases that follow from there.
Okay, so when we're chronically stressed, that kind of gets our nervous system stuck in a way where we can't flexibly or resiliently respond to our environment or something. Like, I'm trying to figure out, we have low heart rate variability, we have high heart rate variability. Is the difference between this our kind of ability to respond or be resilient towards the variability in our environment? Because it makes sense for there to be variability in our heart rate because there's variability in the world out here. But is it, I'm just trying to understand it, is when our heart rate variability is low, it's like that communication between the world and our nervous system is not going right?
Yeah, you will be stressed, and the connection to your prefrontal cortex will not be as efficient.
Okay.
So when you are, and you have probably experienced that when you are stressed, you're not thinking clearly.
Uh-huh.
It's harder to think good thoughts and to do the right thing. Which is also why if you had a poor night's sleep, if you are too stressed, you will go for the easy choice, to have some chocolate to get some energy and get some dopamine, instead of eating an apple and do the more wise choice, for your health. And also, it's the immune system that is kind of damaged. So when you are stressed the whole time, the immune system, because of the cortisol, is not working really good. So we are made to be quiet, to rest, and in that time, the body recuperates and makes sure that all our cells are working properly. And if we are stressed most of the time, and often by sources that we don't think of as stress. So this is what's important or interesting when you start tracking your heart rate variability, is that there are lots of surprising sources of your stress. That is food, for example, late night foods, It can be pizza. For me, it's chili. It puts a huge load on my system. It's alcohol that I used to think would calm me down, but I can see clearly it's just giving a lot of stress. And it can be that you're training too much or training too little. It can be that for women, the week before menstruation is visible in your physiology as a big strain on your system. So it can be a lot of surprising sources for the stress that you never thought of, but that you have to take into consideration to find this balance. And when you have this wearables, almost like a speedometer on your wrist, you can adjust your physiological speed, so to say. So it makes it easier. And so many people ending up in a burnout situation and getting into a fatigue situation, they have been just kind of at a wild physiological speed for a very long time. But this physiological speed is common. So they see this intensity in their lives all around them, so they think it's normal. But it's too much for our systems. We are not constructed to tolerate having so little rest, having so little sleep, and such a high intensity in our lives. And if you don't take that into consideration, you end up when your body says no. Your body keeps the score, and your body says no, as Gabor Mate's book. It will just give you some symptoms, some disease that forces you to stop your speed.
Yeah. And there's the argument that we can use our interoception and just feel the effects. But it sounds like what you're saying is, at least for a lot of people, that's not going to tell us what's really going on. But these wearables will give us data into how we are reacting to various stimuli and inputs, etc.
Yeah, so these variables and heart rate variability is a window into our physiology, into our nervous systems. And we need that because we never needed to develop it throughout history. So we needed very good senses for the outward threats, like eyesight, hearing, smells. We can smell trillions of different smells. We can see 10 million, I think, different colors, so that we can see a small change in the environment if there's a threat from another animal. And good hearing, we can hear small birds singing far away. But our sense of our heart rate and our stress levels, we don't really have. We never needed it. And if we had it, it would disturb the information from the outward senses. So it has really been kept down, our senses for our inner stress, until it's so high that it becomes a big problem. But then there has been a damaging stress long before that, at a much lower level. For example, I have big troubles, even though I know the importance of the heart rate, to feel whether I have a 90 in a heart rate or 60 in a heart rate. I cannot feel that while I am conversing with somebody, while I'm thinking about something or reading a book. I can't really feel this difference. And this difference is very high when it comes to inflammation and stress. If you have 60 in heart rate or 90, that would be a big difference. And it shows how little we are equipped to see these changes. If we had the same quality of our inner interoception as from our outeroception, or whatever it would be called, then we would feel like a tenth of a heartbeat. If we could compare that sense to our eyesight or our sense of smell. But we don't have that sense. But these wearables and to track it in this way is kind of a substitute for that sense. So we can see that. So yeah.
And one of the, for me especially, and I think it sounds like for you too, one of the really shocking or surprising things, not so surprising if you think about it, when you get a wearable for the first time and you see there's certain days where your heart rate jumps, and you named it already, it's alcohol. On nights when you're drinking, and even the days following it, that's when I see the hugest jumps in heart rate. And you've mentioned also, and the Whoop podcast has mentioned this, that alcohol is perhaps the number one most negative thing to our heart rate variability, lowering it essentially. So yeah, let's talk about alcohol.
Yeah. So alcohol is, for most people who start tracking, that's the first big surprise.
Yeah.
The amount of stress that alcohol puts on your body. And as you say, according to Whoop, is the worst stressor of all. And That came as a surprise to me because I used to use alcohol like many other people do to calm me down in the evening. And I did not have any. Of course, I understood that if you've been out at a party drinking, lots and you feel bad that this has a connection.
Yeah.
But I would not think that one or two drinks would have anything to say the day after. But the wearables show this clearly that the worst thing you can do for your stress levels is to drink alcohol. And when you see this physiological price of alcohol, then it's so much easier to take a qualified choice so that you can see that, okay, this occasion is so nice that I choose to have this glass of wine or two, knowing that tomorrow I will feel worse and maybe for a couple of days after that. Because when we start tracking, we see that it can take 5 days until you're back at the same recovery state that you were before you were drinking alcohol. It takes 5 days. So then you know that the day after, you should not strain yourself. You have already put the strain on your physiology through those 2 glasses of wine, the day before. So it's probably something to do with the expectations that when you don't expect a couple of glasses of wine to have this effect, you don't feel it either. But the wearables show it clearly. And so many people in Norway have dropped drinking alcohol or reduced it dramatically since they started reading the pulse cure and tracking their heart rate.
So maybe it's no coincidence that the rise in wearables is kind of coinciding with the decline in alcohol consumption in a lot of countries.
Yeah, I think so. It makes it so visible when you see it, so clearly. And of course, this also shows that the results are very individual because some people can tolerate it fine. Many people show me their graphs and their numbers, of course, through Instagram or when I meet them live. And some people, they can tolerate it well, and other people tolerate it horribly. And some people tolerate it okay. So this shows our individual variability that what we usually as doctors are used to be dealing with is like research showing that the average of people react in this way. And the average number is what we use when we, start treating people, use the average. But the average does not really have anything meaningful to say to you because you may be way far away from the average. And this shows also in the wearables that some people tolerate those 2 glasses of wine fine. And some people like me tolerate it horribly and have to stay away from it. So I'm a bit envious actually of the people who can tolerate it because I used to love having a couple of glasses of wine. But I see now that the price for that is too high for me to accept.
Yeah. And speaking of averages, some of these smartwatches, like the Apple Watch or Fitbit versus the Garmin watch, they're tracking HRV in a different way. It sounds like what you're saying is the Garmin watch is continuously in real time tracking it so you can sort of map on your behaviors, the foods you're consuming and the alcohol you're consuming, etc., with the rise or fall in HRV. But some of these other devices, I haven't dug into it, but it seems like they are giving you an average or they're just tracking it for a period of time. So maybe you could talk about the differences in these wearables and why this continuous real-time one that, say, the Garmin watch is providing differ.
Yeah. So Garmin, the advantage of Garmin is that they have bought the algorithms from First Beat Analytics, which is a Finnish company that has been using wearables for more than 20 years. And they show the numbers throughout the day. So I can at any time, like for example now, I can see that my stress level is really low. I have a heart rate of 54 and my stress level is really low. And I have a good body battery. And that is a number that they calculate throughout the day. That you will get a number in the morning. This morning it was 90, from 0 to 100, which is a good number. I know that I have a good energy today. I have rested well. I can go having my jog. I'm training for the New York Marathon this November. And I can put strain on my body today. And throughout the day, this body battery will go down normally, depending on how much strain I put on my system. And I try in the evening to not go under 20. That's I've kind of two golden numbers. It's trying to be most days above 80 in body battery, and avoiding getting lower than 20 in body battery in the evenings on most days. Some days you're going to strain yourself, hard, maybe for 2-3 days in a row. But you just have to balance and compensate for that after that. And also that I can just by one click, I can see the stress level in the moment, which is now 14 on the scale up to 100. So I'm good and relaxed now. But other times, I can touch my watch like that, and I can see that my stress level is high. Okay, then I should do a breathing exercise. Maybe I should do a cold shower in the morning, to counteract the stress and such things. So my book is full of different strategies to mitigate stress and to help you control the stress, to help you find the foods that will not stress you, and so on. Find the right amount of exercise, because so many people that are doing the right thing, they're exercising too hard, pushing themselves too hard, both in the individual training session, but also over time. Because most of the people that use his wearables, they are not the kind of sofa couch people. They don't care at all. So the most people use his watches are the active people that are more in danger of coming into a burnout situation by straining themselves too much than too little. So of course, I think probably 70 to 80% of people, they are doing too little. They are too lazy. They are not exercising at all. And of course, that will make them weaker and weaker until almost everything in daily life becomes a struggle. This is what I see most as a doctor. 60-year-old, 50, 60-year-old people, overweight, undertrained, underslept, overstressed, eating poor food, and struggling through the days, attracting different diseases, that they may have 3 or 4, 5 different medications for their diseases, and life becomes hard and the struggle. But they are not the people that use the wearables, they probably have them, but they're not really interested. So most people that contact me, they are in the other situation where they have hard jobs, they are exercising hard, they have family, they have busy lives, and they need to control the intensity and find ways to calm down and compensate for the stress. That is 80% of the people that contact me are in this situation.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ways, a lot of things in our control that we can change to increase our heart rate variability or avoid low HRV. We mentioned one of them, alcohol. I guess food is another. Being hydrated, temperature, altitude. There's all kinds of things. Yeah, what are some other ones that you like to talk about next? I guess we can go with food or temperature, or yeah, it's your choice.
So yeah, food is an obvious stressor, and that was a very big surprise to me. I would never have thought that count food in on the possible stressors of my system. Okay, of course I knew that some food is junk food and other are more healthy, but that it could stress and show up in my heart rate, that was a big surprise. So what you eat will affect your heart rate. So if you eat things that you're not supposed to, your body will react, your heart will react. And that is particularly, there are so many food intolerances that shows up on the wearables. So that if you, for example, gluten is the most common, and milk also is quite common. So if you tolerate that poorly, then your heart will react to it. You will see that your heart rate goes up. So, and that was the big surprise for me. So then I cut out most flour-based food, bakery stuff. I hardly eat anything anymore. It was clearly affecting my heart rate. Yeah, and for so many other people too. So what is important is to eat whole foods, eat vegetables, fruit, stay away from ultra-processed food, stay away from things like crisps and candy and sugary stuff, and try to eat more vegetables and real food that your grandma would recognize as food, as we often say. And you should also eat that in a smaller portion of the day. So to have a restricted feeding window of maybe 8 to 10 hours is so good for so many people. So many find out that keeping their eating between those times, for example, between 11 and 7, will make them feel a lot better, will have a lot of impact on their heart rate variability. They will see that a late night meal, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening, will last, there will be stress way into the night. Because we are not made to digest food at that time. Our bodies, the cells in our body have different circadian rhythms, and our digestive system is not constructed to work at that time of the day. So it works more poorly when you deliver your stomach contents, at 10 o'clock in the evening. It does not really want to work. It's not working at its best. So that will keep a lot of stress on your system. Also, temperature was a big surprise. That the cold particularly has such a restorative effect that, of course, so many people have known for a lot of times, but it's more motivating when you see the effect on your watch. So when I see that being in the cold water, that is, of course, uncomfortable, when I see that it gives me calm and I can see the effect on the wearable, it becomes so much more motivating to do that. And other people find that as well. So that is why the athletes, they use cold to mitigate the inflammation that comes from their exercise. So if you're a footballer like Cristiano Ronaldo, who uses the Whoop band, then he uses cold showers and cold water immersion to mitigate the stress on his system. Then he uses that in the Whoop podcast. He said he uses that 200 days of the year. He logs cold water therapy. And on the other side, heat is very stressful. So if you have, I'm not sure how much that would be in Fahrenheit, but if you have more than 30 degrees outside, which, now in Europe and the US and many places is very hot, then it's really hard to get into that restorative state. Your heart rate will go up. It will try to get rid of the heat as good as it can. And that is a big strain on your system. So we cannot really tolerate heat as well as we tolerate cold. And that is something you may not be aware of, that the heat has such a big impact on your physiology.
Yeah. This is very interesting because none of these are like surprising new tools. We've heard about breath and cold water exposure, and we know what foods are healthy and not healthy, and alcohol, nicotine, they're not so good for us, etc. But I think what's really interesting and motivating about this, as you mentioned, is we can see it in the data from the watch. Like, ooh, this is actually true for me. And you read things in books, you read generalizations or averages and research and stuff, but you're like, I don't know, maybe I'm different, or I don't know. But when you see it on the watch, you can see all of these different health practices that we've been taught are actually correct, or maybe they're not. But it's amazing how all of these things you line up with the HRV data.
Yeah. So everything that we know is good for you shows off in your heart rate, and the things that we know are bad also will show. And the interesting thing also, particularly as a doctor, is that the HRV is connected to the diseases that we treat. So it's connected to cancer, to dementia, to stroke, to heart disease, to endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, to infertility, to autoimmune diseases. All the diseases will have a connection to the heart rate variability. You can Google any disease and add heart rate variability, and you will see that there are research that shows the connection. And the connection can, of course, both be as a cause and a consequence. So that you have a low heart rate variability as a sign that your body is under pressure and that your immune system is compromised, that will lay the ground for a disease to occur from any kind, from any organ. And then when you get the disease, that will further lower your heart rate variability, because that's another strain on your system that your immune system has to work with and the body have to struggle with. So it gets even worse. So it's kind of a vicious circle there, or a spiral. For example, it's possible to detect who will get cancer. You can see that, you can predict that in some way from the heart rate variability. If you get the cancer, the prognosis can depend on your heart rate variability. And if you get cured in the first place, then if you have a relapse, the chances of getting a relapse will also show in heart rate variability. for example. So that is how you can use that for different forms of cancer.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was getting a little distracted by this truck that's making sounds. Here in Asia, there are these trucks that drive by and they blast these songs out. But that does bring me to another point. I haven't heard you talk about this factor, but I imagine it does also affect our HRV sound, low frequencies, high frequencies, hearing these sounds, producing these sounds. This might be something new for you, but I imagine you've thought about it. So yeah, give me your thoughts.
Yeah. Noise obviously is a stressor. So we see that there's so much noise from traffic, from air traffic. I think that the percentage of places on Earth where you are not disturbed by noise is like 1%. There will be some sound in your environment from artificial human activity. So noise is definitely a big factor and is probably visible in the heart rate variability. If I would now Google noise and heart rate variability, I would sure there will be some findings to show that there will be a difference. So to keep your environments free of noise, that's important.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And along with this blasting of noises these days, there's also a bombardment of lights at the wrong times. Can you talk about, say, sunlight exposure, light exposure at the right times of day that we've evolved with, and say lights at night? Have you thought anything about that?
Yeah. So sunlight seems to be a very good and important thing for our physiology. Of course, we are throughout the evolutionary history, we have had the sun, without clothes and for most of the time. And we are developed under the sun, using the energy from the sun in our cells to improve their function. And that becomes visible in heart rate variability. So in the summer, when we get more sunshine, the heart rate variability will be better. I can see it clear from when I went this summer. I was sailing in the Seychelles, and coming from Norway and down into the sun, there's a steep rise, in the heart rate variability, as a sign that all the cells, when you're out sailing, you get sunshine 90% of the day, and that's important. I've seen so many people also responding to that. And of course, in the wintertime in the US, particularly in the northern parts of the US and Canada and northern Europe, the heart rate variability will be lower because of the lack of sunshine. And this is probably also the cause that so many diseases reach the top, like mortality from all causes and outbreak of all kinds of diseases like the flu and other diseases will reach their top in the wintertime. Because our heart rate variability is lower, our cells, our immune system is working at a slower speed, so to speak. So sunshine is important. And light from other causes as well, that the importance of light in regulating our circadian rhythm is also being more and more known, that we should get natural light as early after we get up as possible. And that we should reduce the amount of light, particularly blue light, in the evening, so that we can get a rhythm that is as close to our historical rhythm, so to speak, as possible. When we do something that is against our biology, we lose. And now, as people, as humans, we live almost exactly opposite from what we are developed, how we are developed to live. And then we lose something from that, from all the different aspects of it, from sunshine, from food, from rest, from activity. If we do something that we're not evolved throughout history, if the Stone Age people did not do that, so to speak, then we are losing something from that.
Yeah. And some of these rhythms we can't avoid. They're running in the background, altering our HRV, whether we know it or not. One of these you mentioned was the menstrual cycle. In the first half of the menstrual cycle, the follicular phase, there's a higher HRV. And then in the second half, particularly you said the week before the period menstruation, there's a drop in HRV. And that's very interesting and useful to know, because you might be doing everything right as a woman, and then suddenly your HRV changes and you're like, what did I do wrong? What is it? Oh, yeah, it's normal. It's this natural cycle. And then as we age, same thing. The earlier first half of life, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, we tend to have a higher HRV, and it naturally kind of goes down and down and down as we get closer to death.
Yeah, it does. And particularly for women, it's so important to track their heart rate variability because, and what I thought, and this is the surprise because my book is the first book in the world on how to use the wearables to track the heart rate variability, which is also why it has been translated into English and 7 other languages also. But then when you're the first one, then you discover things that have not really been, it's probably been discovered somewhere before, but not in this magnitude. So that when the women see that they're, because we can see that the week before menstruation for women with PMS symptoms, the dip in heart rate variability is just as big as in COVID. When I see people having COVID for a week, it's exactly the same size of the dip as in women with PMS, premenstrual syndrome. And that shows the physiological load on their systems. So it's not just a mood or that they feel a certain way and get irritated more, or it's a physiological load on their system that becomes visible. But the interesting thing is that and I used to think that, okay, that's unavoidable. That is just a natural part of the cycle. Is it just how it is? But so many women can tell me that when they start to regulate their stress levels according to what they see, this curve will be totally flattened out. So it's not necessary to have this PMS, the symptoms. When you start adjusting for the stress, you can avoid those symptoms. And the reason seems to be that if you are too stressed and there's too much cortisol in your system, that will disrupt the hormones from your pituitary gland, from the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, and the gonads from your ovaries. And it will disturb the progesterone release so that you get less progesterone. And that is a big part of the cause of the PMS symptoms. So you are able to control this a lot more effectively. And then, of course, with the wearables. So, of course, some of the most happy people that contact me are women in the fertile age managing their PMS.
Yeah. Have you looked at your data when you're spending time with certain people, say that you feel really safe and connected with, versus with other people who you don't feel safe or connected with? Or have you looked at any such data for other individuals?
Yeah, that would be mostly for other individuals because I'm probably very stable in that sense. So other people's doesn't really affect me. It's their problem if they're not agreeable. But I see that for many people, they are stressed by other people. So that they can contact me and say that when I'm working with a certain colleague, cooperating with this colleague, then I'm stressed. And with the other colleagues, it's okay. And then some people have asked their bosses to avoid or minimize the contact with this certain colleague to make their days better. Other people have not been in that situation, so they just have to take it upon themselves to react better towards this colleague, to not let this colleague's way of being annoy them so much or irritate them so much. And then, of course, when you can see the result on your watch, then you can start. It's so much easier to do that, to do breathing exercises, to calm down when you see on your watch that you are stressed in this moment. So yes, absolutely, that has been for many people, because we also see that we react different emotionally. Some people react emotionally much more to their surroundings than other people. So I react less. Other people, I saw one friend's results the other day, and when his wife or girlfriend had PMS, his went down as well. So he had the same kind of downturn in heart rate variability according to his girlfriend's PMS symptoms. And I can recognize that. I remember, when my wife had the period, I'm older than that now, but my mood would change with her mood. Yeah.
Yeah. But we all have our own sort of HRV levels. I was looking at mine back before I lost my Fitbit, and it was quite low. It's like in the 20s or 30s. I'm like, what's going on? Maybe it's a problem with the sensors, or maybe it's a problem with my system. But regardless, whether the system's broken or not, or I'm broken or not, I can see, okay, this is my baseline, and this raises it, this lowers it. So I was going to ask about, say, the differences between using EKG data versus the light sensors, the PPG ones that the smartwatches have. There's the argument that maybe these smartwatch-based ones, they're not EKG, they're using light sensors and things to track blood flow, etc. That maybe they're not accurately tracking HRV, especially, say, it's on the wrist versus on the chest or on the forearm or something. So I'm kind of throwing out a lot out here right now, but one is, there's a different kinds of sensors, EKG versus PPG. There's also the place on the body. Of course, when we go to the doctor, they put the electrodes on our chest. I'm sure there's no coincidence. It probably just works better there. It's close to our heart versus on our wrist. But should we worry about all this? You can talk about these differences in body parts and sensors and things, but does it matter? Is this? It sounds like maybe even if there are some flaws or some limitations on these sensors on our wrist, rather than EKG on our chest, it doesn't matter because we can still sort of see this is my baseline and this is what affects it.
Yeah. So I was then lucky that the first thing I used for 2 years was the ECG based one. And it didn't have an app on my phone, or it had an app on my phone, but it just gave me the results. This is how it looks. So I had to kind of do the math and understand what does this mean. And then after 2 years, when I, by chance, got the information that Garmin had the same system in their watches, I could use it in parallel. And then I saw that it's by far good enough.
Yeah.
The differences between the information I get from my ECG based and from my PPG based on the Garmin watch was so similar that I didn't really bother to continue using the ECG based one. And of course, if I had come first to the watches, then I would have thought, okay, this cannot be accurate enough. You know, this system cannot be true. It's more a kind of a gimmick and not useful in a medical sense. But then, as I had used this ECG base for 2 years, I knew that okay, this works. This works well enough, and of course, a universe away from just guessing ourselves. So it will probably become better by time. Maybe it's even going to be a patch, a small patch you put on your chest that will communicate with your watch, maybe even. But for most people in everyday life, the watches are good enough. So I don't think, maybe for an athlete, in the Olympics, when you're fighting about centimeters and tenths of a second, it can be useful because they use those ECG based, a lot of them. But for most people in their everyday life, it's not worth the hassle of using these more complicated versions of the wearables.
Yeah. I don't know if you listened to, there's an episode that Peter Attia did a couple months back on HRV, and he specifically complained about the Garmin watch, saying that it's inaccurately tracking his heart rate. How would you explain that experience that he's having?
Because he's talking about using his. I heard that episode, using his Forerunner while running, while exercising, and while you are exercising, then the movements on your hand can really disturb your heart rate. So absolutely, when I'm exercising, when I'm running, I'm going to run out now after this podcast. Then I'm putting on my chest strap. So while you are exercising, to get the accurate, then you need to have a chest strap with the wearables on your wrist. Yeah. So that is what I write in the book as well. So that is very well known. But the important thing is not, for most people, is not the heart rate while you are exercising. The important thing is the heart rate after you have been exercising, because then you will see the effect on your system after that exercise, and then you will see whether that was too hard or easy. So I have such a busy life now. I'm writing a new book. There's so many people contacting me, so many lectures, so many podcasts, after the success of the Pulse Cure, that I cannot spend a lot of energy recuperating from an exercise, from a training session. So I have to train in zone 2, which means that I have to stay at 140, 150 in my heart rate. And then I know that after my training, I will be quite quickly back into the parasympathetic mode and ready for work and ready for the rest of the day. If I had trained hard, really hard, then I would put a lot of strain on my system, and it can take days to recover. So if I'm running, for example, if I take a VO2 max test, and that can be just for 8 minutes, because I did a test just to check if the VO2 max results from the Garmin was accurate, and it was. And that gave me 4 days to recuperate, because you are running at your max. So the difference between running in zone 2 with a lower heart rate and zone 4 and 5, that is a huge difference. So and so many people, as I mentioned earlier, they train too hard. They often think that, okay, I have so little time to training, so when I train, I must really go all in and train really hard. But that is not sustainable often. So anyway, it's not necessarily the heart rate while you're exercising, but how it will look in your heart rate after you have been exercising. And for people with a low VO2 max, the amount and intensity of exercise that you can tolerate can be ridiculously low. It can be just by walking up some hills, you have overstrained yourself and overstrained your capacity. So you can have a VO2 max. Some people have less than 30 in VO2 max. Then you must start very, very easy if you start exercising. And that is what most people do wrong, around New Year time. Then they start exercising and they overdo it and they get demotivated and quit.
Does this also apply to other factors that we've talked about, like food and alcohol and temperature and stuff that we should look at it maybe in the moment, but it's spanning out the time frame and looking at it, hours and days into the future. Is it the same with these other factors, or is it specific with exercise?
I think it's mostly alcohol and exercise that can have these lasting effects. But anyway, it's the totality of all the different loads on your system that you have to take control of.
Another thing I wanted to talk about too is trauma. It sounds like one way to explain trauma is people their nervous system being stuck, probably in sympathetic land, but perhaps somewhere else in freeze or elsewhere. And then there's these trauma kind of release therapies, things like TRE and somatic experiencing that I don't know if you've looked into, but if you have, it would be interesting to see how these trauma-based therapies, specifically something like TRE or somatic experiencing, or I don't know, something else using the body, affects HRV. I might be throwing you a curveball here, but yeah.
I saw that Bessel van der Kolk in the book The Body Keeps the Score. This was how he was using heart rate variability with trauma therapy, so that if he did something that worked, he could see it in the heart rate variability. And with trauma and PTSD, the trouble is that you have a nervous system that is always in somewhere on the fight-flight scale. Your brain is not allowing yourself to come down into the real restorative mode. So then you have to do a really hard job to take control of your autonomic nervous system, and that can be a lot harder than you thought. So I can see that because so many of in that situation contact me and are part of we have an online community called thepulsecure.com, and they contact me and tell me about it. And they often can tolerate less of the different stressors. They tolerate less of cold water therapy. They tolerate less of fasting techniques. And they tolerate less alcohol, less exercise, and so on. So to have a stressed autonomic nervous system that they usually have with the trauma situation, that makes it harder. They can tolerate much less of the different stressors. But that also makes it so much more valuable to have these wearables, to have some way to be able to have this speedometer for their special speed, so to speak. And so that's really important. And the important thing also is that our heart rate is really the only way that we can demonstrate the the severity of symptoms for these people. Because when they go to the doctor like me, and I take all the tests I can think of, I find nothing. There's nothing that shows their state of burnout and their state of fatigue and so on. But the heart rate shows it immediately. So when I see their curves, I can see that a minimal exercise or a minimal strain on their system produces high stress. They can go into the shower and have a warm shower because that's often what they think is good. Take a warm shower and they will be stressed for like 2-3 hours. And if they take a cold shower, a really cold shower, they will also get stressed. But what they have to do is to have a very gradual approach to it and have just a little bit colder shower and very calm and patiently get used to having colder showers and exercising more and more, but from a very low intensity in the beginning.
You're also a photographer, and you learned certain things about photography, how to be a better photographer, how to have a better experience doing the act. Earlier, you wrote a book about photography, and now you wrote this book about HRV. And I imagine in your mind these two books and this experience as a photographer, and now as this HRV guy, they're kind of melting together, I imagine. So maybe you can teach me about how these two worlds are now blending. What photography taught you about HRV, or how maybe what HRV is teaching you about photography and I guess visual perception itself.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of photography. I've been teaching a lot of photography workshops around the world, and I found that when we do photography, we are using so many parts of our brain, and we are hunting and gathering, and we are sharing pictures, and we're kind of doing exactly what we are made for as human beings. And that is part of the attraction that I had to doing photographic workshops, being a participant, leading the workshops, that I found it very helpful. And I found that the people who were doing that had another health level than the patients that I would see the week after the workshops. I was going back and forth from patients in my office and then somewhere in the world to photographers trying to get better pictures. And then I saw that what I'm doing in photography and what photographers are doing are something really healthy. And so many photographers would describe the reason why they were doing photography as therapy. They would say that I photograph for my own therapy. And I understood that, okay, we can use this more strategically. So that's why I wrote The Camera Cure. Unfortunately, it's a bestseller in Norway, but it's not translated into English, unfortunately, yet. So I made like 55 different exercises that would train your mind to do the lifestyle strategies in a better way, to teach patience, to teach taking control of things, to teach how to compose your life, through photography, how to tolerate difficulties. Because what I see as a doctor and everywhere in life is that you have to tolerate difficulties. You have to accept them and to appreciate difficulties, because if you don't, you have big troubles in life. The only way to avoid difficulties is to be dead. If you want to live, what you do is confronting difficulties, and you have to learn how to do that. And taking a good picture is a small scale difficulty. And how you approach this difficulty is how you approach any difficulty. So the strategies are the same, and you can learn them through taking a picture. And it was through my work with photography that I understood that the autonomic nervous system that I, as a doctor, knew only as a fight, flight, and freeze system. I understood that this will also be important in hunting and fun and doing things. And it's a system that is activated not only, when you're fighting and flight situation. And I asked my professor that had written a book on the central nervous system about if the fight, flight, and freeze and the sympathetic system was working also when you are photographing, when you are doing something fun. And he said, you might be onto something there. I found no evidence of it. I found no articles, nobody talking about that when you're doing something that you're interested in, that it also activates the sympathetic part of your nervous system. So this is how that my mind was probably primed, that when I read about Bessel van der Kolk, I connected it to my photography experience, and immediately knew that this was important. And of course, when I started tracking my system, I saw that when I was doing funny things and interesting things with intensity, it had the same load on my system as it would have if I was doing something scary or uncomfortable or yeah. So I think my experience from photography and from using the nervous system to take pictures was very important in me understanding the importance of the heart rate variability and the autonomic nervous system and combining those two, as you say, as you think. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a connection.
So maybe this is another kind of way into this is embrace or jump into these sort of short stressors, like get our system all ramped up through focusing on taking the picture or getting into the cold water or doing some fasting, intermittent fasting, for example. And it's kind of like this stressor, but then there's that release afterwards where you put the camera down and you're looking at the sky and, just feeling the grass on your skin or whatever. And then you're out of the cold water and you're, so it's like this, like jumping into the stress, but then letting yourself unfocus and relax or something. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it makes very much sense because we are made to stress. So that was one of my biggest concerns about writing the book, that people would refrain from stressing at all and trying to be as calm as possible all the time. But that is just a prescription to get weaker, and then everything you do will be hard. So we are supposed to the point is to regulate, upregulate, and downregulate our intensity and have the control ourselves so that we can do really hard things, use all our forces. That if you want to take a really good picture, you're struggling hard. Say that you're in Morocco in the mountains and you have 1.5 hours to take pictures of a family or a situation. You are really doing kind of an Olympic effort to do that. So you need to use all of your forces, all of your energy, all of your concentration and presence, and take decisions, what to do in that moment. And usually you can be at the top concentration only maybe for 90 minutes. That seems to be some kind of cutoff. And then after that, you must relax, watch your pictures, savor the experience and relax. So you need to have a kind of a pulsating lifestyle. You have to not get stuck in some routine that you do something every day and get rigid. We are supposed to be flexible, to be able to do hard things and then to do nothing. And the hardest thing for a lot of people is to do nothing. We're not made for that either. So that is the book I'm writing now on rest, because of the strategies in the Pulse Cure. People seems to have most trouble doing is to rest properly, rest deeply enough to recover. And then when you have measurable rest, when you can see the amount of rest you're actually getting, then it's so much easier, of course, to find the right dose of resting to mitigate the stress that you're having. So yes, we're supposed to do hard efforts. We're supposed to compensate for that until the next day. So Anders Ericsson, who led the famous Berlin Philharmonic study on the violinists in the orchestra, he found that the best people in this orchestra and across other like business and whatever other parts, the successful people, they are good at resting. So the resting phase is a creative phase. It's not just a downtime that is wasted. I'm just reading now about Charles Darwin, who did a lot of rest, walks, and he was just concentrating maybe 4 or 5 hours a day writing. And then he made plenty of time for downtime and concentration from reflecting. That is also important to know, that the relaxation time is not a waste of time. It's maybe the most productive time.
Yeah. But it seems like when our HRV is really low and we're quite stressed, we're stuck in stress, we don't feel like allowed to rest or something. That's how I feel. It's when the HRV rises and your nervous system kind of feels more balanced and flexible and like elastic and stuff, where you can bounce between parasympathetic and sympathetic, that you're like, yeah, it's time to rest. But when I'm on hyperdrive, I don't know, it's like I'm so stuck on this sympathetic mode that it's like I look down on the rest. I'm thinking, oh, I can't do that. I can't afford that. I got to work harder before I can go there. So maybe I guess my point here is maybe by improving our HRV through these tactics and tools that you've explained in your book, The Pulse Cure, maybe by raising our HRV, we can actually start to like see more clearly and change the way we're thinking about our world and our life, and maybe like let ourselves rest. Because I don't know if it's even possible to make that choice when your HRV is really low. You're just like running around like an animal, or at least I am.
Yeah. So when the HRV is really low, when you're very stressed, it becomes even harder to relax. Often it will be like if you're relaxing, then you fall asleep. You're so tired that I see that in lots of people, that in that state of when they relax, they are scared to relax because they may just fall asleep because they're so tired. And then it's so much easier to drink more coffee, to eat some more sugar to keep the speed up. So it's actually a bigger effort to break down and relax than it is to just keep the speed high. But of course, it is not sustainable over time, and that there will be a price to pay for that in the end. And it's important, as you say, not just to think, okay, I will do this and then relax. It's better to relax in between. That is what the best people do. They put their breaks and intervals in between their work. And it's not like they're working hard and then relaxing. That is a worse way of doing things in performance-wise.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get your book, it's everywhere, literally around the world, online, in bookstores, etc. So shouldn't be too hard to find. The Pulse Cure. If people want to connect or learn more, where can they go?
They can go to Dr. Torkil on Instagram, dr.torkil, or thepulsecure.com. And I must say also it's an audiobook. A lot of people, especially those who listen to podcasts, like it's better to have it as an audiobook. So it's on your iPhone, it will be on your book app and so on. So you can reach me there. I'm on LinkedIn. So I hope a lot of people learn how to use the wearables, because it's really a way to stay away from disease, from taking the control from the doctor's hands and the healthcare system's hands and into your own hands, so that you can avoid contracting the modern day lifestyle diseases that you don't need to have if you get your stress system in balance.
Yeah. And I might be putting you on the spot here, but are there any other sort of general resources, books, other experts, communities, anything that you think would be helpful for people who are trying to learn more about this? Like you said, if you Google HRV, if you put it into Spotify or whatever, it's you popping up a lot of times. Actually, it's like, wow, why is there not more people on this? But I imagine you might have found some other resources yourself.
Yeah, I'm on so many podcasts, and I look back onto
Yeah,
the episodes, and I'm the only one talking about this.
exactly.
And that is very strange.
Yeah.
But you have the Whoop podcast. So Whoop is one of the devices,
Mm.
and they have a very good podcast and blog that can explain about heart rate variability. So I would go there to see. But this is it's an exploding field, so it's
Yeah.
so much more coming by the day. So what I say now, particularly regarding the devices, can be outdated, next month, or when Samsung comes with their Galaxy Ring and so on, then they may shift the market totally. So
Yeah.
there's so much, and that is good, because now there's money to be made for keeping people healthy. Usually there's too
Yeah.
much money to be made from sick people, so that there is money from the commercial interest to keep you healthy in this way. That is a good thing, I think.
And this is my prediction, and I might try to play a role in this myself, but I think there will be technologies and companies that are leveraging HRV as sort of their core metric for their software they're selling, or for their, say, their virtual reality experience or their AI thing or whatever. I think once certain companies or potential entrepreneurs realize the power of this HRV, they can use this data to create very powerful experiences that they can actually sell for money. And now we're not just with our watch and with this little graph on Garmin, but we've got immersive experiences showing it to us, or we have I don't know. There's lots of possibilities, but this is great because now instead of that money, the healthcare money being pumped into pharmaceuticals and weird treatments, now we're getting into prevention and putting the power back into people's hands. And I hope, and I predict that a lot of companies emerge basically using HRV instead of HRV as a service or something.
Yeah, that's my hope too.
Thank you so much, Torkil. Keep in touch.
Thank you, Michael. So nice to talk to you.